Hello and welcome to Banfield. It is Tuesday, which means that we have only been through 2 days this week. You know, most Tuesdays in August, I honestly worry if there's going to be enough news to actually fill a show. Not this Tuesday, not by a mile. So get comfy because a lot happened today. And every one of our little nuggets tonight is actually a massive boulder on its own. I'm going to start with Paul Manafort. He is talking and he is saying a lot. And we have been waiting for him to talk ever since he went to jail. A trip down memory lane here. Paul Manafort is a longtime lobbyist and Republican political consultant who was chairman of Donald Trump's presidential campaign back in 2016. In 2018, though, he was charged with 5 counts of tax fraud, 2 counts of bank fraud, 1 count of failing to disclose a hidden foreign bank account, and 2 counts of conspiracy. And that is not to mention the cyclone of allegations that he connected the Russians to Donald Trump during Donald Trump's bid for the White House. He was not charged with that. But a jury did find Manafort guilty of all those other things, except for conspiracy. And he later pleaded guilty to the conspiracy charges. He was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison, and he spent nearly 2 years behind bars before COVID got him sprung. And then Trump pardoned him in 2020. But Paul Manafort says the only reason the feds even came after him the way they did was because he was so closely tied to Donald Trump. He says he was over-prosecuted and probably never would have been sent to prison had he not helped Donald Trump get into the White House. Manafort stands by Trump to this day. He even admits to unofficially helping Trump in his failed bid for the White House in 2020. And so if you are looking for insight into what makes Donald Trump tick, and people, isn't that exactly what everybody wants to know? Everybody who's for him and everybody who's against him? Well, Manafort is a great person to ask. And fortunately for us, he is talking. NewsNation's Chris Cuomo sat down with him recently, and they discussed a wide range of topics, including Manafort's legal troubles, that whole Russia business, when allegations were made that, you know, Trump and his campaign had ties to the Kremlin, the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago, and Trump's plans for 2024. That last topic, Trump running again for president, that part is fascinating. Manafort was one of the architects of Trump's presidential win back in 2016. So if he says that Trump is planning to run in 2024, people should stand up and take notice. Chris Cuomo did. Here he is one-on-one.
The last thing you say in this book is you believe the former president, Donald Trump, is going to run again in 2024. Do you still believe that?
Absolutely. More so now than I did 2 weeks ago.
Now, is that because of what you know or because of how you feel?
It's because of what I know about him. Has he told me that personally? No. But I know the man. I know that when he was elected president in 2016, people didn't understand why he was elected, how he was elected, and they didn't understand him as a person. They still don't. And the raid on his home was not something that was going to discourage him. If anything, it was going to make him more steadfast in his thinking about running.
Well, that is something. The FBI search of Mar-a-Lago may actually push Trump into the presidential race instead of keeping him out. Trump has been raising about $1 million a day over the FBI search and seizure. He emails his supporters sometimes up to 9 times a day, calling the search a raid, saying that it was illegal, and actually calling it a break-in. I like the law. Okay, so let's be clear. It wasn't a break-in. It was authorized by a federal judge. It was signed off on by the United States Attorney General himself. That's politics outside, okay? Just the law. It wasn't a break-in. But nonetheless, his supporters are steaming mad about the search. They're steaming mad about the FBI agents. They're steaming mad about the Attorney General. And they're even steaming mad about the judge himself who signed off on the warrant. And while all of that works itself out, there's Trump and what he is planning to do in 2024. Of course, wanting to run and being allowed to run are two very, very different things. And Trump doesn't just have a Mar-a-Lago problem. He's got a George Yorkington problem. as in criminal investigations are also happening in Georgia, New York, and Washington, George Yorkington. And the stakes could not be higher, guys, because putting aside being blocked from running for president ever again, he could be blocked from even walking outside ever again. And to that end tonight, we now know Donald Trump didn't just have a few inadvertently placed classified documents among his stuff that was transferred from the White House to Mar-a-Lago. He actually had more than 700 pages of classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. And some of those documents detailed America's most covert intelligence operations. That's the kind of stuff that can get a spy killed. And it can also end a program that's taken decades and billions of dollars to put into place. That little nugget was in a letter from May 10th that was sent by the National Archives to one of Trump's lawyers. And we have that letter, strangely, because it was released by Donald Trump's lawyers themselves. Trump is trying to use that letter to prove that he needs a special master. That's an independent person who goes through all the documents, and they keep aside the stuff that's privileged, like the communications with his lawyer and the communications about presidenting. He also wants the investigation to stop, at least until the special master can go about their business. The Department of Justice wants a couple of things, too. They want more of that security video, the footage from Mar-a-Lago. And there is a very good reason for that. Because what they saw in the original footage that they already got from back in April, that stopped investigators in their tracks. That's an understatement. According to the New York Times, the video shows people at Mar-a-Lago moving boxes in and out of that so-called locked storage room near the pool. It shows them in the hallway, and it even shows them changing out the containers that those documents were originally housed in. The Times goes on to report that the warrant that allowed the FBI to search Mar-a-Lago in the first place, that warrant was granted in part because of that troubling footage. Now, witness interviews also played a part in that federal judge's decision to let the FBI go in there and grab those boxes, not just from the pool room, but also from Trump's office above the ballroom, the former bridal suite that's his Mar-a-Lago office. But it certainly seems like this investigation and all the others could go on for quite a while. But how long is a while? Well, we are officially 4 months away from 2023, folks, and 2023 is a campaign year for presidential candidates. And tonight, we are officially 11 weeks away from the midterm elections. And a top Republican, the de facto leader of the Republican Party, facing down criminal investigations all the way from Florida to George Yorkington, that could present a problem. I am joined by three people who know more about this than probably anybody. Doug Heye is the former communications director for the Republican National Convention and the former deputy chief of staff to the Republican House Majority Leader Eric Cantor. Tara Setmayer is the GOP's former communications director on Capitol Hill. She's a senior advisor to the Lincoln Project, and she is the resident scholar at the UVA Center for Politics. And Shan is a legal analyst and a former federal prosecutor. Okay, Doug, I'm going to start with you. You heard the clip with Chris Cuomo talking to Paul Manafort, and there's Paul Manafort saying, look, I know the guy. He hasn't told me, but I just know he's going to run, especially because of that raid. That would have pushed him more towards running. The question I have, though, he is definitely the most popular candidate among Republicans, but is he the best candidate for Republicans?
Well, I don't think for Republicans is a good way to state it. I don't think we know yet. Republicans are trying to feel what this new post-Trump world is, if it is a post-Trump world, and we just don't know. Republicans, by and large, would like to, at least on Capitol Hill, move past Trump, but they also know that that may not be a possibility. So they want to stay on his good side, avoid Trump headlines as much as they can, which is a difficult thing to do. They want to talk about inflation, rising crime, and the border. And so any news stories that are Donald Trump driven, by definition, are negative stories for them, even if they have to get on board and back Trump all the way.
So, Tara, you heard the interview as well. He talked about Ron DeSantis. Cuomo asked Manafort about Ron DeSantis, the other, Republican frontrunner. And it was kind of interesting, their back and forth. Take a look at this.
You think you can beat DeSantis?
Well, I don't think DeSantis runs against him.
Why not?
Because he doesn't have to.
Because he can wait because he's young.
Yeah.
You think he joins his ticket?
No, I don't think he gets asked.
Really? Why not?
It doesn't give Trump what he needed.
What does he need?
Somebody like Tim Scott.
Okay, so there you have it, Tara. What about Tim Scott? Is that the person? Is that what Trump needs? And if not, what does Trump need?
No, Trump doesn't need Tim Scott. That feels like a affirmative action pick, in my opinion. Trump is probably going to pick a woman, and we've already seen several Republican women that are vying for Trump's affections, from Kristi Noem to Elise Stefanik and others. So to Sarah Palin, even potentially. So that was an interesting out of left field answer by Paul Manafort. But Donald Trump, he definitely doesn't.
Can I
need
just tell
another.
you when you say interesting and out of left field answer, and you just said that Sarah Palin may end up being VP pick again, I want you to just repeat that.
Well, I'm saying that Tim Scott is not someone that I think it necessarily helps Donald Trump in the way that he would. He's not, first of all, he doesn't have enough personality. Second of all, Donald Trump would like to make history and probably pick a woman. And like I said, the MAGA Mean Girls sweepstakes have already started vying for who's going to be the vice presidential pick for Donald Trump. But that's assuming Trump gets out of the primary. And I'm not so sure that Ron DeSantis doesn't necessarily run. Depends on how damaged Donald Trump is after the January 6th committee hearings are concluded. We don't know what the Department of Justice is going to do. And Ron DeSantis has been on what I would consider a preliminary presidential exploratory tour over the last couple of weeks, going to places like Iowa and campaigning in Ohio and Pennsylvania. These are pre-presidential campaign stops, and he's raising money in places like Utah. So, Ron DeSantis has his eye on the White House, and I'm not so sure that he would be reluctant to not get in the race if Trump is damaged.
Well, for a news perspective only, I'm not cheerleading anybody. I sure hope Sarah Palin ends up, in any race, because she's just fun to cover. I mean, no matter what, she's fun to cover. People just love to watch her, even if they don't like her, even if they do. They really like to watch her, and she does. She has some zingers. All right, Shan, the whole idea of the Trump critics have said that the only reason this business is going on with regard to Mar-a-Lago is that Trump is a political rival. It's a pretty far-right statement to say that, because there are all sorts of reasons that you can, criticize the FBI for. But when it came to that, Chris Cuomo asked Paul Manafort about that. Have a listen to his answer.
If you think about it, when Trump was elected in 2016, his campaign, one of the key slogans in his rallies, lock her up, lock her up. He becomes president. What did he do? He didn't lock her up. He didn't go after her. He didn't turn the scales of justice against her, because he understood all of the history of this country and that never been done before. You don't go after your political opponents. Not only is he the past political opponent, he very likely could be the next political opponent. So the unprecedented nature and the threat to democracy, I think, is very grave by doing something like this on a charge that is really quite spurious.
Okay, Shan, so this is a legal question that has sort of a cultural question, imbued into it, and that is that how is the public to know that this is a legitimate investigation and not a politically motivated investigation? Because we are not behind the door, we're not inside, we're not a fly on the wall of decisions that are being made. And the public, it's important what the public knows and thinks.
Absolutely. And I think it's a critical part of our democracy that the public has faith in the integrity of prosecutions and the court system. And how do we, as the public, looking from the outside in, know whether there's integrity? Ultimately, it's because trials are public. And so if a charge is brought, the evidence is, for the most part, going to be public, and we can see it and make up our own minds, even though we're not the jury or the judge, as to whether there is meat on that bone or not. Now, at the investigation stage, a little bit harder, because you don't necessarily know as the public what the predicate is for the investigation. So the only thing to do there is to see ultimately what comes of it. I would say that in this particular situation, such an unprecedented situation, potentially with a criminal investigation focusing on the former president, I think one thing that's helpful is to look at the history here of what's been happening, which is there's been a lot of evidence already coming out in many, many different realms and many different cases and investigations of potential wrongdoing. So this isn't a situation where someone decides to run for president or some other office and now suddenly there's an investigation about them. There's been a lot going on for a while. So I think the public can look into that and take some comfort in it as well.
I heard one commentator today saying, well, when you're in office, we have laws saying you can't be charged when you're a sitting president. That's a Nixon era law, but you can be when you're out. So perhaps it's taken 18 months to sort of, tie everything all up. Okay, Doug.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was something that
it was guidance.
That Nixon and Spiro Agnew spawned. It's guidance. Okay, I'm sorry. Pardon me. It's guidance by the DOJ after Spiro and Nixon and all their shenanigans, and it was embarrassing for the country, et cetera. So, Doug, tonight's primaries in Florida yielded Val Demings as the candidate who's going to go up against Marco Rubio for Senate, and a lot of people are just curious about whether the business of Mar-a-Lago in Florida is going to have any effect on the races in Florida.
Well, it's certainly going to be something that Val Demings talks about. The things that Republicans want to talk about, inflation and crime and the border and so forth, are also the things that Democrats don't want to talk about. And so when they can talk about Donald Trump, they're going to do so. He excites their base. He's a motivator. He's a fundraiser for them. But also what we're seeing is Val Demings and a lot of other Democrats are banding together to raise money together. Democratic Senates in a lot of states. And what we've seen, Tip O'Neill used to say that all politics are local. More and more they're national, and Donald Trump's going to play a role in that. Obviously, the Dobbs decision by the Supreme Court is playing a role in that for Democrats as well. We'll have to see how it all shakes out, but these races are more competitive than I think anybody thought they might be 6 or 8 months ago.
That is the title of your new book, by the way. All politics are national, because Tip O'Neill is rolling in his grave on that one, but I never heard such wisdom in an expression before. That's amazing. Okay, Tara, NBC poll that came out, I was pretty surprised to see what was out on top as the thing that most voters were worried about in this midterm election. 21% of them said the most important issue was threats to our democracy. Look down the list. Cost of living, which everybody's been freaking out over, was only 16%. Jobs and economy, same thing, 14%. Immigration, lower, 13%. Climate change, 9%. Look at guns and abortion. I feel like by the month, these things would have flipped on their ear. But Tara, look at that threats to democracy business, because if you're a Trump supporter, you're worried about the threat to democracy because you think the election was stolen. If you are a Trump critic, you're worried about threats to democracy based on Donald Trump coming back to the White House. And so it's hard to tell what that 21% really means.
Yeah, I mean, I was encouraged to see that. At least people are paying attention, because the threat to our democracy is existential, and it should be the number one issue on every American's mind going into the 2022 election when they're considering what candidates they're voting for. Are they voting for candidates who support democracy, who support our constitutional republic, and who believe that our elections are free and fair and that Joe Biden is the legally and free and fair elected president? And that's what matters, because all the other policy issues do not matter if our democracy goes under. So I'm encouraged by that. But the flip side of it, too, is that you have to take, it's one poll, and, polls are a snapshot in time. We're several weeks away from the midterm elections. We're coming off a summer that was dominated by the January 6th committee hearings, which were hugely impactful and pretty damning against President Trump, former President Trump. And the economic situation is starting to change somewhat, with gas prices coming down. The Biden administration passed the Inflation Reduction Act. Whether it reduces inflation or not doesn't matter. It's about perception. So all of those factors right now could contribute to that poll. But I'd be curious to see what that poll looks like after Labor Day.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Shan, big story that broke in the Washington Post a couple hours ago was about voting data from voting machines being downloaded by Trump attorneys, one in particular, Sidney Powell, who we've heard of a lot, and then shared to a very strange cast of characters, Trump supporters, election deniers. And the list is like, holy cow, a surfer, a meteorologist, a seduction and pickup coach, a podcaster who believes political enemies should be executed. That's all funny. But the truth is, sharing data like that about voting systems, that's frightening if you think of what that can do in the future to voting. Not only, technically what it can do, but what it can do to the perception of voting.
Yeah, it's a very insidious problem. And in this particular instance, don't know the full story yet, but I'm looking at kind of two issues. The first is how initially was the data accessed? And from the reporting, it seems like at least part of it was a breach. So that obviously is a criminal trespass into the electronic system. That really needs to be prosecuted because this type of voting information, election information, is really considered critical infrastructure. So it really needs to be protected. The other aspect of this little confounding is at some point, some of it was subject to a protective order. I mean, that's the first thing I thought of is if this was part of a normal discovery process for these frankly bogus civil suits that arose, there would be a protective order. And at some point there was a protective order over at least part of it, but then the judge lifted it. So this, in that sense, I'm gonna have to lay some blame at the judge there for lifting that order. And also on the part of the states who are responding to this, they needed to be super careful that their data was protected. So you can't just allow the protective order to be lifted and then anybody can get at it. So it's really kind of a perfect storm of a lot of things going on.
It seemed crazy. It seemed absolutely crazy, like any old lawyer. Hello. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.